Hello, welcome to the Integrated Care Podcast from the Collaborative Family Healthcare Association. I am Grace Pratt, the production editor, and I'm joined by two of my co-hosts this morning. And we are going to have a conversation just reflecting a little bit that I'm really looking forward to a little bit later this morning. And also, I want to acknowledge, just in case the first part of the audio gets cut off, there's a lot of things happening right now. We're having a lot of bugs going around in Washington and Ohio, Jen. Why is that?
Illinois.
Illinois. I'm
Yes.
sorry. The
You're
whole
fine.
Midwest just
Midwest
lumps
is a
together
blur.
for me. It's, yeah.
All good.
And Washington and Illinois and Oklahoma, and there are cats, and it's just a lot. But we are so happy to be here together and to be here joining you in your earbuds. We're going to be talking today about just like seasons and changes and, what seasons we've been in, what seasons we're seeing ahead, both kind of personally and professionally and in our micro, like at our local systems, but also in the broader healthcare system. So I'm really excited for that conversation, but we are going to start the way that we always do with our icebreaker. And since we're talking about seasons, which this was entirely inspired by a short road trip that I took to Tulsa with my best friend last weekend. And we were driving and, everything in Oklahoma is pretty much green now and the trees are flowering. And then she went back home to Boston and sending me all the cherry tree pictures. So it's just season changing time. And so it got me thinking. So I'm curious to hear from you. What's your favorite season? Do you love spring? Do you hate spring? Is there a different one that's your favorite? So we'll go around the circle clockwise from my perspective. And so that has us starting with Jen.
All right. I'm Jen Thomas, Director of Integrated Behavioral Health, Morris Hospital, Family Med provider by training. So favorite season, I would say spring. I'm an April birthday. So I think that was ingrained in me as a kid. It's I'm looking forward to my birthday. So, but no, I love spring. I'm a gardener. I got into gardening a few years back. So I love the time of year when you can go to the local greenhouse nursery and see all the annuals and bring home plants and put them in pots and then try not to let them die, weed them and water them and all that stuff. It's very metaphorical for anything in healthcare, especially integrated care, right? It's you got to tend to the seedling or it will not thrive. So yeah, I love spring. I love seeing all the green come back and all the budding trees. It's makes my heart happy to see that life reborn for sure.
I love that. I mean, I might need a consult on my flower bed. I've lived in this house for a year and I have the builder shrubs in the front bed. And it's really funny because you can tell the HOA requirements are 10 shrubs and one tree and blah, blah, blah. And so there's just, you could tell they took them off the back of the truck and put them in the ground. And there's
Sure.
It's not anything.
Yeah. And I'm not an expert by any means. It's learned by failure. Ooh, that thing died fast and it did not look good. So next year I took pictures do not do this. Ooh, this was dumb luck. This worked. So let's do that. But my in-laws love gardening. They took a class in it and this cute acronym. You need a thriller, and a spiller. So you need something that dangles vines off a pot, something that fills in, so maybe petunia, and then a thriller like a geranium that's the flashy piece, and it actually works. So give that a try. Be mindful of part sun, full sun, that they're not kidding about that on the label. You can't throw an impatient in the sun. She's going to be nope. So
I'm here for the integrated care conversation and stick around for the gardening tips. I love it.
Never know where the conversation's going to go.
And then next we have Bridget.
Yeah, so I'm Bridget Beachy. I'm a licensed psychologist by trade, BHC, Director of Behavioral Health. And as far as my favorite season, I feel it does change. And being in Washington with, we do have the 4 seasons, but we also have, unfortunately, fire season, which comes at my favorite time of the year, which is late summer, early fall. So now that throws a ripple in it because the fires are so intense that I'm I don't know if I could say that's my favorite season anymore. So I'd probably say late spring, early summer, because the allergies aren't so bad later on. And it hasn't hit fire season yet. So that's what I'm going to go with. And so we can do a lot of golfing. And as long as you get up and go early in the morning, then you're able to bypass some of the crazy amount of heat.
Sure.
And so there's just I feel like every season there's something to really look forward to. So I enjoy each of the seasons. But if it wasn't for the fire season, I would definitely say late summer, early fall.
For sure. Yeah.
Well, anything that gets you outside, I'm sure.
Yep.
Although I bet you're outside in every season.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. Yeah. I love like hiking in the winter and hiking in the snow. It's one of my favorite things to do. So yeah, every season. But the problem with the winter is the darkness. I feel like is so intense of just like it, especially being so far in the Pacific Northwest. It's like 4:30 and dark. And so I think that gets me more than the cold, because you can do something about the cold, but the darkness is intense.
That's a real
Headlamp
thing.
can only go so far.
Yep. Absolutely.
Well, I am rounding out our group today. So I'm Grace Pratt. I am the behavioral medicine faculty at Integris Great Plains Family Medicine in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma. And I kind of what you said, Bridget, that there's something that you love about every season. I think my favorite thing is that the seasons change. And this is going to be a little ironic later, because one of my questions for us is like, why is change so hard and why do we have to do it? But when we're talking about the seasons, I love like the first part of summer when it finally is warm outside and you can go out and feel the sun, or like when the fall finally starts to cool off, which of course in Oklahoma is like early October, and just I'm ready for the next thing. I enjoyed the season while it's here, and I'm like, okay, I'm done. Let's transition to a new weather, a new season, a new change. So I like the changes. I like the fact that
change can be fun.
It can be sometimes.
Sometimes.
Well, I am not sure if Naftali's going to have any news and notes to insert since he is on sabbatical, but there may be someone from our CFHA team that wants to do that. And so if they do, we'll put those here. I know that last month was the virtual conference. Were you able to, either of you able to attend? Or
I went. It was great. I'd never done or I did during one of the COVID years, I did CFHA virtual, but I could go, I went to one day, I had patients the next day. So, but it was great. Really good sessions. Kind of that professional development, thinking about your career, and there was some great stuff on thinking about your personal brand. That term, I was like, oh, I never thought about that. I guess I was a little uncomfortable with like the whole like, oh, promoting yourself. I feel like in healthcare, it's like, well, I promote my team, right? It's the health system or the hospital. But it was just it struck a nice balance of just like, hey, you can be mindful and purposeful and, making that next career step happen. It doesn't need to happen to you. It was great. I really enjoyed it.
That's awesome. It sounds like it's going to be relevant to our conversation today too. I love that we're able to have that opportunity through CFHA, and then, as a nice little gathering in between our in-person. And I know that we're going to be in Phoenix this fall, and really looking forward to that and seeing everyone there. So there may or may not be some news and notes right now. And if there were, great. And if not, let's move on. So I'm going to transition us into our main conversation today. Like I said, I'm just feeling reflective about the seasons and things changing. And it made me think about the fact that, we've been doing this podcast for over 5 years now. I've been with the podcast from the beginning, and Bridget, you joined not too long after that. And so there we have seen changes in that time. And I think that we see changes in our micro systems over time a lot, and in the broader thing. So I'm curious, like, as I throw this topic out, when I say that, like, seasons in healthcare, integrated care, and your systems, what comes to mind for you? What season are you in right now?
Oh my gosh. Yeah, this has been 2022 and into 2023 has been massive changes at the organizational level. We've essentially have almost a brand new C-suite team, and chiefs, CEO, CMO, COO, CQ. Yeah, like it's almost everybody at this point in these last, I think, 3 years, but most rapid in the last year or two. And then we got a new EHR, and that's been it was like 18 months in the planning. And so it went live March I think it was March 7th, it went live.
Mm.
And one of our interns, and I can't remember exactly where he got it from, but the saying of change, is it good, is it bad, or too soon to tell? And I think that almost always when it comes to change, it should be more that category of too soon to tell. And you start making those, snap judgments of, oh, this is good, this is bad, and I don't know what we're going to do, or there's this thing. And maybe it's just my brain's optimism, but looking back on, I feel like it almost always moves to like, that change was needed and it was really good. And
sure.
so when I start getting too judgy early on, it's just like, maybe it's a too soon to tell, and we got to see how it rides out. And I don't think it would be fair to say that something's like all good or all bad. But in general, it seems like the more distance you get from a major change, the more you're like, you know what, I see why it needed to happen. And I'm kind of happy where we are right now.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel your new AHR pain. We went live with new HR April 3rd, which coincidentally was my birthday. I was like, come on, happy birthday, not to me. It was fine. But 100%, there's some aspects of the new HR like, oh, this is better. I like this better. And other ones like, oh, I wish we could do it the old way. So it's too soon to tell, but trying to look at the positive. And I'm, trying to think of the mantras I've been taught or heard of. And I love that everything is new until it's not. I think we said that to each other in my clinic like 20 times that first week, because we're like, it's going to get better. It's going to get smoother. Before you know it, it's just a couple clicks. You don't even have to think about it, but you do have to think about it early on. And that feels frustrating, right? It's slowing you down. So I think seasons changing in primary care. Yeah, that kind of leadership changes. How'd the leadership changes feel for you, Bridget? Was it like nerve wracking? Like, are they going to follow, the shared vision? Is this going to be a new course of action? I can imagine that could be like, whoa, what's the new boss going to do?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, it's been pretty good and pretty smooth. And good. I think that with and sometimes I can get a little tunnel vision, like as long as integrated care is fine, like that. I can sometimes get like that, which I don't mean completely, but there's just a little bit of like,
sure.
You think about those early battles and it's like, are we going to lose any ground? And I have not found that to be the case. In fact, I think that I've gained more ground where it's just like the folks that are coming in, it's like, this is just how we do things. And we had such support of the leadership who had left for integrated care, or most of them retired, to be honest. So it was kind of like, this is how we do things, and being a part of those interview processes. And so it felt smoother than what you would think. But any change is change. And it's, you're getting used to different styles and different ways of presenting. And there were some cases where it's like, I'm still fighting. And it's like, we're on your side. And so that was just that was a whole different thing for my brain. It's like, I'm used to fighting and you're like on,
I get it. You don't have to fight
my side. So it's been something, but not as bad as one might think.
No, that's great. I think that speaks volumes to the strength of your leadership of integrated care program, right? It's like, it has a strong foundation. We are not going backward. This is here to stay. It's blossoming, to use our season analogy, and it's got firm roots, take it all the way. But no, I mean, that's good. I think that, you've made that good foundation, that the program is valuable and it's only going to move forward. So good for you guys. That's cool.
Not to be too much of a systems theory nerd, but you guys are describing so much of what we know to be true about change, and healthcare, I think we're always trying to work towards some continual change. We have the QI projects and continuous improvement, and there's always new, I don't think any of us ever in any system I've been a part of are like, okay, it's good, we'll just let it roll like it is. We're always looking for ways to give our patients better care or improve our systems and our procedures. And but sometimes that continuous change, like, it can slog on forever until some kind of external force happens, whether it is a change in leadership, which our system also experienced about 4 years ago, and almost entirely, like, we had a new CEO come in, and then almost all of the suite has changed since then. And, that has steered things in some ways, or like the pandemic, happened, and it's such a central, like, like force of a change from an external pressure. And then we adapt and we shift and we figure out, like, that too soon to tell, I think, is a really important thing for us to hold in mind, because sometimes when there are changing seasons, we do want to, depending on where we stand, we either want to be like, oh, this is going to be so much better and this is going to solve all of our problems, and thank goodness we're done with whatever, or we're fearful of it because we liked the way that things were. And so to be able to hold some space for ambiguity and not decide too soon about what it is or isn't, or what's going to fall out, is pretty important, I think, to our ability to adapt.
Yeah, for sure. I feel like there's a lot of that. Well, not just in healthcare, right? All fields, right? The great resignation, where so many folks changed jobs or quit a job or got a new job post-pandemic, that I think everyone kind of had that sense of like, it's time to, take stock. What am I doing professionally? Is this working for me? Do I have a good work-life balance? Do I need to make a change, work somewhere else? And I think that's certainly true in healthcare, or at least amongst some of the providers that I know of. And I think for the good, right? It gives us a chance to really say, all right, that was kind of crisis mode in healthcare, but what are we doing professionally? Are we fulfilled? Should we be devoting time to more, passion projects, or things that really speak to our, how we're fulfilled in the work we do? And I think that's been a good change, or a good post season, like, the good things that came of COVID. Telemedicine is one that comes to mind. I think I've said that a lot to my patients, of like, yeah, if we intentionally were like, all right, we're going to do video visits, it would have taken us years. But, come end of March, early April 2020, it was like, you have to do telemed visits tomorrow because nobody's coming in the office. So I think, yeah, sometimes those kicks in the rear are good, and do help you kind of take stock of like, all right, where am I at, and is it time for a change? So
Yeah, I think that you're hitting the nail on the head, that sometimes these crises can demonstrate what we can do, what we can get done.
Yeah.
And so it brings that level of urgency to the point where it's, it hits that tipping point a lot quicker. So nobody wanted the pandemic, still don't want the pandemic. It's still in some ways over, but not over. I don't know. It's a whole thing. Yeah. But I think that it did demonstrate some of the actions that resulted of it, was like, we can do more than what we think we can. And we can reevaluate things more than what we think we can, to see if this is really, but it's interesting because we just got a memo that the telehealth visits, at least in Washington, will last through like 2024. But I'm like, does that mean that they're now ending afterwards? So I was out of the country for 2 weeks. I didn't have my computer for 2 weeks. So I don't know what's happening in the world
More
right
ambiguity.
now. So hopefully we find out.
Right.
But I'm like, oh my gosh, are we really considering removing virtual visits? So I don't know.
Right. No, absolutely. I saw a similar email memo of the public health emergency is ending. I think it was May 11th, or I'm like, okay, and then the implications of, right, like exactly what you're saying, telemedicine, and how does that impact the future? But I don't know. Again, I think it's that the providers that do the work, and even the patients, of like, we've gotten a taste of something that works for us. Not that everyone needs to be telemed, but maybe they're sprinkled throughout your day when it's convenient for the patient, and that shouldn't go anywhere. That's a good thing. That's one of the only good things that came from such a rough couple of years with the whole pandemic, is, hey, we got a little more nimble and flexible. So I think that, we're going to speak up with that. Nope, this cannot go backwards. Video visits, phone visits, it's just another way to connect with patients. And integrated care, like you guys probably do that more than I do as a primary, but there's definitely some role for that. And it's nice to have that connection to folks, because sometimes that was the barrier, like, oh, I can't, my car's broken down, and you're like, gee shucks, I can't see you. But I think it's a good way to just kind of stretch and literally meet people where they are. So
maybe there are things like that we don't see until we've moved out of a season necessarily. And I wonder even if there are forces and decision makers who say, oh no, we're done with virtual visits, and then the backlash and outcry from patients and providers is such that they're like, oh, never mind, it'll be fine, you can keep doing that. And it makes me think about how we have so many sayings about hindsight, and that we see things after we move out of a season. And so I wonder, this question may be too abstract, but if you look back in seasons that your system has been in the past, or seasons that you've experienced in the past, what are some things, like looking back, maybe that you didn't see at the time, but that you took from that or learned from that time in your life or in your system from a past season?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's been tons with regards to staffing and fit, and seeing whether or not the setting and it was right for certain folks, and vice versa, if they found it to be fulfilling. And if I think that there's been opportunities to do more flex work and which have come out of some different aspects where, like, I'm thinking early on, our schedule would change all the time, and there wasn't like admin time. And then I don't even know exactly how things shook out, but now we have it, and it's like, it's so much better. So I don't know, I guess I'm not really answering your question well, but thinking back on the last 9 years at the organization that I've worked at, there's like these little pockets of like, oh my gosh, I can't believe we used to do it like that. I'm so glad it's different now. I can't believe we used to do it like that. And so it's so much different now. I'm so glad that this happened. This seemed to work out better. And it wasn't always planned.
Yes.
I wish I could take credit for all of it, or I might take credit for all of it, but a lot of it wasn't planned. A lot of it just kind of happened organically. And looking back on it now, I'm like, oh, I'm so glad that those changes happened.
Yes. Yeah, 100%. Yeah, I think, okay, so our health system, yes, I think it was the obstacle at the time, and then opportunity. Like, we started off with no intentional integration. It was okay, what are we going to do about behavioral health? It was it was a refer. We have no place to refer our primary care patients, especially with Medicaid. We got to hire a psychiatrist. That'll solve it. And we're like, we put some feelers out, like, nope, that's not going to do it. So we, said, well, maybe we got to look at reshifting that paradigm, and maybe these integration things and some of these models where we can do more in primary care is what the path we need to go on. And that was not a popular or a, like something anyone had done in our system. So that was like, ooh, this is new. Is this good, bad, or too soon to tell, right? So thankfully we took a leap, and we had a good leadership team let's try it. And and early on we did some co-location, and we did some partnering with, private behavioral health specialty office, and had some co-location of nurse practitioners and LCSWs in the primary care office. And it wasn't a bad thing, but then those relationships fizzled, those providers moved on, and it was like, shoot, now it's time to go back to the drawing board. Now we have nothing. We just have regular primary care and this behavioral health needs. So here we go for that obstacle, and now it's turning into an opportunity, and it's gone well. But again, at the time we were probably like, oh no, we're back to nowhere. Our provider left, and now we have nobody to help us. And it's like, no, we really needed to help ourselves in a way, right? Like, switch the culture and learn things like integration from awesome people like you.
You're describing such a reflective process, like change happens. And just like you said, Bridget, sometimes it's things that we didn't intend, or just like, the seasons, I think the metaphor continues, because it changes whether we want it to or not. And it changes whether we wish that it would or not. But if we stop and reflect and really think about, excuse me, sorry for the noise. If we stop and reflect and really think about what is good that I want to keep from this, what do I want to change, and put some intentionality around capturing those adaptations, that can lead to such lasting and meaningful permanent change. Like, we need this thing was sort of a happy accident, and we need to keep it, or this was the way that we solved a problem temporarily, and we're never doing that again. Which I think we've had some of those things in our system as well.
Yeah, I was just thinking, I like how you said the obstacle turns into opportunity. Like, I remember we went through a CMS audit, and it was so terrible at the time, but because of it, we made so many improvements in our documentation, and then it set the way. And so even when we changed EHRs, we still had an idea of like, what were the basic things that needed to be in it. So then that made this change not so bad. And so I like the obstacle into opportunity. And Grace, as you just said, like things like, oh, like we used to do, my God, before there was technology that was easy, like Teams or like some instant message system, we used like our cell phones for like handoffs.
Sure.
And like the thought of going back to like, I
Yeah.
understand why we did it at the time and it made sense contextually at the time, but like we will never go back to text messages again. Like,
Yeah.
and we didn't think about technology in a way, how is it going to help support our work? Like we weren't so intentional. Now we're very, all of us, you know, within the system are, and I would say across the world are very intentional about like, how can technology aid me? But that wasn't even really on the radar back then. So I don't know. It's just interesting how,
Those
how things evolved. But if you can, like you said, if you guys can, like, if we all can be intentional and say, okay, yeah, what changes have happened? How did we adapt? What worked? What didn't work? And then being a little bit more intentional for solving future problems. There's a lot of rich information in there.
For sure.
What challenges have you guys seen, or do you think some people might experience around changing seasons? I'm laughing because I feel like there are so many of them. One that comes to mind for me is when not everyone wants the change at the same time or at the same pace. We're talking about team-based care, and that's something that's really important to us at CFHA and in our integrated care podcast, obviously. But teams are made of many people, and people have different stages of acceptance of change or, readiness to change. And sometimes that can be a big challenge for teams. I've experienced that being a really big challenge for my team sometimes. And so I'm curious about that or other challenges that you guys have seen with changing seasons.
Yeah, I think that's a wise observation. It's so true that the season changes whether you want it to or not. You're getting a new EHR whether you want it or not, so it's like, all right, you've got to reframe that in a way. It's like, how can we roll with that resistance and not, complain about it and let it ruin our day with negativity and stuff. But I don't know. I guess one lesson we've learned in our system is having, at least, especially the medical docs, the PCPs, like being part of the change and bringing them to the table. Because the last thing that, maybe it's not just the docs, but people in general, it's like you'd rather come to a decision together of we want to do this and change and move in this direction rather than the coming from on high of you will do it this way. I mean, just the buy-in from the PCPs, like, I can think like chronic care management is like a Medicare initiative that we're supposed to do with our Medicare patients. And it feels, it's great. It's like we got a nurse care manager and she calls them after they leave the hospital and checks in. But it's not a system where the PCP really takes ownership in that. It's not like, all right, this is an initiative where I, brought in from the beginning. I have buy-in. I see how this, is something that I want to initiate with my patients. It's just this other entity that happens behind the scenes without us. So with integration, I think while we've had some successes getting those PCPs in the conversation well before launch, like, what are your pain points? How could this help you? What do you need help with? Wouldn't it be nice to have a BHC or care manager around to do a warm handoff when, you need some backup for, what is this diagnosis? Oh, they could use some, coping strategies. So I don't know. I think that just is one way that helps us with change in the medical system or the primary care culture is co-owning the change and having a conversation about it rather than just here's your new marching orders. Good luck.
I love that. Choosing to be a part of it. And, when you were given that choice and finding ways to contribute to the planning instead of just like the resistance, and maybe that's a place where we can activate our team members and ourselves when we are nervous about a change or resistant to a change. Like, can you become a part of that conversation? Which, on healthy teams, I think all the stakeholders are invited to the conversation to contribute. And unfortunately, sometimes teams aren't as healthy and people aren't consulted or aren't considered. And a lot of times when that breaks down, I think it's the people with the least power who are consulted the least. And, that could be, workers in our system, but could also be patients or people that are having like the trickle down effects of policies. And so when we can, and I hope, for our listeners, and this is a reminder to myself, when we're thinking about implementing change, who are the stakeholders that we can bring to the conversation so that it can be a collaborative effort and a unified effort, because that resistance, it's a little bit of a, like in motivational interviewing, we can get curious about that resistance, because that resistance that someone is having to change may be telling us something important that we can listen to or work with, that we can engage in dialogue, hopefully, instead of just dictating what's going to happen.
Yeah, it's like you're on a tightrope in some ways, where you want folks to be a part of the change and include them and have us all be on board of like, okay, what can we contribute, while just, again, tightrope with not having like that toxic positivity to where it's like I know that when we went through our EHR, the amount of times like, well, this is going to be great. This is going to be great. This is going to be great. And it's like, I agree. And actually it is better. Like it is factually better. It is subjectively better. It is better. But like, it's also okay to say like, I'm nervous. Like all the reports that we had created for the last 9 years are now gone, X, Y, and Z. And so when somebody keeps saying like, oh, but it's going to be great, oh, it's very invalidating. So, and I'm not saying that I did this perfectly either. I'm sure that there's times where folks on my team are coming to me and I'm like, okay, but yeah, like we've heard this and like a time to move on. And so I think that leadership, it's this never ending tightrope that you're walking, where it's like, to hear concerns, and like Grace, you're saying like there might be some really important stuff in that resistance that could be telling us something, and hearing that, but then also at a certain point making the shift to like, okay, but this is the new reality. Like we're not going to continue to create workflows for the old system. Like we're not going to do that, because that's not healthy either. And I don't have any right answers on this, other than to say that if you are in a position of if you have folks who report to you, just to remember to find that balance of like validating. And then you do have a right that if you validated and you vetted it, and we've already made that change, and where somebody's still making contributions that are based on the old system, we do have a right to say like, okay, that is the old system. We are not going to be doing that. So, and then I guess, as I'm saying all of this, the word that keeps coming into my head is grace. And maybe that's why you're named that, because you have a lot of grace, but just grace for each other, that there's going to be times as a leader where I'm going to screw it up, where I'm going to come with either too much toxic positivity, or I'm going to let us linger in the past too long. And then my boss might do the same thing, or the people that I report to. So just to have grace that everyone is trying to manage this, and we all, manage change differently. And so it's a very emotional process too. And I think that, not to call out healthcare, but just thinking my system, like that seems to be missing, is that at times is we don't recognize how emotional this process is. And we try to like act like it's not. And I'm like, this is all very emotional, y'all.
And we're surprised when we feel emotional about it. Like, am I overreacting? Is my crankiness just me? It's like, no, a lot of us probably feel cranky about this, and that's valid, but then there's the good part too. So I agree. I don't think we leave time for that. I don't think we leave space for that. It's like EMR implementation, click here, click this, workflow, done. And you're right. There's no like time to like, oh yeah, let's, this has been tough. This is a change. That's a huge undertaking for a health system to make that shift, and just acknowledging that kind of, I think good team leaders, like they do that, like, yeah, this is tough. And thanks for your work. We've had some good, examples of that in our system of like, wow, the leaders are really like acknowledging the team that's put on all the, unflashy work, months and months of preparation that, yeah, it's not glitzy, but it's why we're as successful today with the launch. So yeah, just acknowledging those things, I think helps everybody feel like it's worthwhile.
So other than not everybody being ready for a change, or having different levels of readiness or different ideas about what should be changing, what other challenges have we seen, or do we anticipate teams might experience with changing seasons?
Say like cognitive overload and emotional. I don't know why I'm just saying, just it's not only cognitive, just the overload of like, you know how it is when there's so many moving parts and there's just like one little thing and it just feels so huge. And then, 2 weeks later, you look at what the ask was and you're like, oh, that's like really easy. It's no big deal. And it's like that task didn't change. Your load is what changed. And so and so remembering that as you're rolling things out, that is this urgency to change everything all at once. And I think that urgency in some ways can be useful, and also to remember to pace ourselves through this process. And if your timing isn't the greatest, then there could be unnecessary resistance to something. And it's just because, everyone was already full. Whereas if you bring up that same thing 2 weeks from then, I think the pacing, and I think I have a lot of work to do in that arena, because I'm kind of like, oh, let's get everything done. And then if I can't get everything done, then it kind of falls off my radar. And it's like, Bridge, we got to come up with a plan where you're like pacing on a steady, what is the next 3 to 6 to 9 month plan? Not either get it done now or have it drop off your radar.
Yeah. When you're mentioning season changes in healthcare or primary care, like the literal thing that comes to mind is just the calendar year and different visit types, like especially for family medicine that sees kids, or a peds practice. That's very dependent on what stressors or what's coming in the door. Like your pediatrician's like, oh my gosh, it's school physical season, it's June, everybody needs a sports physical, August 1st, because camp and practice starts August 15th, so they're under a stress there for preventative visits. So there's more paperwork, there's more preventative immunizations, so that kind of bogs down nursing. There's more documentation there. And then the flip side is, come fall, like it's flu season. Now everything's turned on its head with COVID, who knows? But certainly more of the cold winter months, with acute visits, cough and cold season, flu season, whatever that would look like. So I think that's definitely a cyclic thing in primary care, of the calendar year and the weather seasons affecting, what stresses us out. In January, it might be because we've got, 20 people calling that need to get in for a fever and a cough, versus August, where it's like, 10 kids forgot their physical and they got to do it tomorrow before camp. So I think that's just another reality of challenges with different seasons. But again, there's always a good part to that season, right? Like Grace said, like no matter what the season, there's something you can look forward to. Maybe you love Christmas, so you can get through that, tough season in primary care with all the colds, because it's Christmas time. Or maybe it's summer, we're bogged down with physicals, but maybe there's a vacation to look forward to. So I don't know, keeping those things in mind at least keeps us afloat sometimes.
Listening to you talking about that is just bringing up for me the ACT principle surprise, that like change is inevitable and shifting is inevitable, but a lot of times it's our attempt to hold on, or our attempt to resistance, that actually is what leads to our suffering. Because when we try so hard to keep things the way that they were, like you could resist all day long, that, no, I'm not going to do 100 sports physicals. Well, like you kind of are, because that's what your patients are asking for, and that's what's getting scheduled. And so like, if you're going to have a terrible attitude about it, or if you're going to refuse to do it, or if you're going to whatever, like that's what's causing you more pain than if we can stay in a little bit more of a state of fluidity. And if we can recognize that it's sometimes it's not the changing of the season that's actually so painful for us, but it's the holding on to what was, or fear of what may be. Like I feel like this is my life lesson right now, just in like, even in my personal life, just of this phase of my life, is recognizing that like pain or regret or attachment to what happened in the past, or fear or worry or even hope and looking forward to what might happen in the future, are both just things that take me away from what I need right now, and being able to be present and being able to respond and adapt and to show up with my full self in this moment and this season that we're in. I don't know where our audio is going to start for our releasing, but literally my 4 children were home sick, all of 4 of them throwing up this week. And like, that's just legitimately a miserable experience. Yep. There's no way to shine that up or make it look pretty.
Survival mode.
Yes, survival mode. But like, and this is, you said earlier, Bridget, maybe it's just the optimist in you. And I will acknowledge, like, I am an optimist and I am someone who's always looking for the positive, but like, how much worse would it be if I also spent those 2 days just like hating life and how terrible it is and like how miserable all of this is? But if I know that, bugs change and they'll pass and there will be something else and we just survive and we just move through it, that mindset change is so important. And I think of that like on a larger level for our systems and for ourselves. Of course, it all comes back to ACT, right? Act. But just this being in the present and showing up with our full self to the day and the season, and sometimes the hour and the moment that we're in, makes such a huge difference.
For sure.
Yeah. Yeah. And Grace, thinking about this, do you have any advice for our listeners, or for I have a friend, aka myself, that when those changes are happening, all around, it's actually another ACT principle of self as content versus self as context. So when there's a lot of change around me, I'll start to internally kind of feel a little bit more out of control, and things aren't going the way I want them to be, and I'm very regimented, so it's like throws me off. And so then I kind of will be like, oh, well, I'm having a hard time. And I will completely separate myself from the fact that it's like, are you having a hard time, or are you in just a really tough context? And so our minds will play tricks on us in that way. And same thing, we'll see that with our patients, right? They come in, they're saying they're having a hard time. And then you ask them a few questions. It's like, I wouldn't necessarily say that's like a you problem. There's been some things that have happened way out of your control that absolutely are impacting you. And they're like, but I'm just so anxious. It's like, yeah, you are experiencing anxiety, but X, Y, and Z happen. So is there any tips that you can have for the rest of us, the audience, and maybe even in our clinical work, to help people be grounded in, look, it's not that you're suddenly out of control. There's just been a lot of change around you, and to just kind of have that compassion for ourselves in that moment?
Listen, I'm so glad you asked. Because the other thing that I have been learning, less personally, but more like academically over the last several years, is about our neurobiology of chronic stress and how that impacts us, and just the absolute importance of checking, being in our body and checking in with ourselves and recognizing what's happening so that we can identify dysregulation and re-regulate ourselves. And that looks all kinds of ways, like so many different ways. But I think so many times we just have a sense of like, oh, I'm off. Something is wrong. Like you said earlier, like maybe one day you get a request and it just feels like the end of the world. And then 2 weeks later you get a request and you're like, it's fine. Because you're dysregulated and there's so much load that you're carrying on your nervous system and your mind and your body. And so like the absolute important thing is to become so in touch with yourself and what it feels like to be steady and regulated and calm, and what it feels like to be swinging outside of that regulation. And so you can either be hyper aroused, like you're just like jittery, the stressed out all the time, or you can be like hypo aroused, or in that sort of freeze or frozen state. And what happens is it's a like, I'm sorry, you open the can of worms, Bridget.
No, that's great.
You say
we end up in this, it's a recursive process. So like we rev up our energy and we end up in that like hyper alert state. And then our body, because we cannot stay in that state, slams on the brakes. And then we end up in that really shut down state. And we can sometimes like careen between those two states, totally outside of our conscious control. We go all day at work or with our kids or like moving through our life. And then we finally get home and sit on the couch and we crash and we like can't get ourselves back up. And because that's that like swinging back of the pendulum. And so what we need to do is be able to recognize that your body was designed to do that. Your nervous system is there to respond to stress. But the part of our body and the part of our brains that respond to stress is not the same part of our brains that is like logical in our thinking brain. And so, sometimes it's, there are 14 patients on my schedule today, and this one's running 30 minutes late. And now this other patient told me when my hand was on the door that they're suicidal. And our brain and our body is like, bear, danger, you're gonna die. And it doesn't matter that we know that we're safe. Like we know that in that moment, we are not literally about to die, but our body responds like we are. And so we have to become aware of what's going on and recognize what are the strategies for us of like putting the brakes on or re-regulating, or sometimes if we have swung into that frozen state, we also need to be able to come back up. So I've been doing a ton of work on this for our residents. I'm presenting on it next week at STFM. That'll be over by the time this comes out. And I don't know how much overlap we have with, I know we have some residency people that are listeners, but maybe I will link. I've made a handout that I've been using with our residents and that they have been finding helpful to distribute to patients as well. And I can link to that in our show notes, that has just lots of regulation strategies and thinking about where we are. Because the thing is, like, okay, so think about your energy on a scale from 1 to 10, and 5 is like you're engaged, you're alert, but you're calm, like you're responsive, you are very regulated. And a 10 is where you're basically having a panic attack because you're so hyped up. And a 1 is like you're almost catatonic because you're so frozen. We need to recognize where our sweet spot is, and we need to be able to readjust to come back. Now, your body, if you're very dysregulated, is going to swing from like an 8 to a 2, because that's where you go, and then you finally sit down on the couch and you crash. But when we are being intentional and responsive and intentionally re-regulating ourselves, we need to recognize, oh, I'm at a 6, or I'm at a 7, or I'm moving up. And then we have to think about it like a ladder. So we have to come down 1 notches or 2 notches or calm ourselves down, because when we try to jump all the way down, it doesn't work. It's ineffective. And that's where I think a lot of our patients that were like, you need to do deep breathing, and like, that doesn't work for me. It's because they were like a 9 and they were trying to do deep breathing, and like, anyway, so you have to match. This goes deep. I should just do a bonus episode and talk about
it's good stuff.
and neurobiology and all of that, because this is like recently my passion area.
No, that's amazing. I feel like I need to go in a time machine and listen to you talk about that a couple of years ago when we were launching integration, because I think my enthusiasm for the work, we need to do this, I was at a 7 or 8, and then we'd meet resistance with things that aren't my control. You know, my good friend Kathy is my nurse practitioner, like work bestie. She's like, you internalize this way too much. And I was like, I am. It's like, it's not a referendum on Jen whether we can integrate and move forward with COCM. It's like, no, this is for the good of the system. And so I don't know, like, exactly hits to your point, Grace, of like, you got to just watch yourself, right? Like, check in. Like, if I'm at an 8 because we just, lost a staff member, oh, gee, we can't code for this now. It's not it's time for the bear. It's more like, all right, chill out. This isn't something I control. Let's keep it here. I'm more effective as a team leader, communicator, as a 5.
Our
good
self-talk, our relaxation strategies, are just engaging and really good taking care of ourselves. All of those things are things that can help reset and re-regulate us. And we need a whole wide range of a toolbox of them. So you need things you can do while you're in clinic, in a break between patients. And then you need things that you can do for a week on vacation at the beach. But it's not practical for us to think, oh, well, I'm dysregulated, but I've got a vacation coming up in a month. Like, okay, but that doesn't help you right now. I mean, it might a little bit if like planning for where you're going to eat gives you a little joy. But ultimately it's not realistic. So we have to be in the moment in our responsiveness. And we can see that in each other and can promote that in our teams and encourage each other. And I think the more that we can name our dysregulation, name the season, and this is kind of my big takeaway too, as I'm thinking about seasons, we've got to name where we are and recognize, because all of this will slip by beneath our notice. And then the next thing we're like, I feel terrible. I am not coping. This is awful. Something is wrong. So we just have to name our seasons. We have to live in those seasons. We have to not wait for them to be over, which I think is something also a trap that we fall into a lot. Like, oh, well, when this is over, then it'll be better. Or like, I mean, residents are terrible about that. When I'm attending, everything's going to be better. And I'm like, listen, friend, you're still going to be you. And our healthcare system is not going to be different. And there's a lot that's out of your control right now. And some of that is going to be better, but not all of it. So like I always tell them, and I work in family medicine, so it's 3 years. And like your life doesn't stop for these 3 years that you're in residency. And so you need to find ways to still live your life. Again, back to ACT, right? Connect with your values, connect with the things that are important to you. But I think that's true for all the seasons that we're talking about, whether it's residency or new EMR implementation or interview season. Drives me freaking nuts and lasts for 6 months for residency interviews. That's one of my banes of the season. But like naming where we are, recognizing that waiting until it's over for things to get better is not really adaptive for us.
Right.
We've got to kind of find ways to move through that, and then being intentional about what we keep and what we change.
Sure.
Well, I am glad that we mentioned the dysregulation, because I think, to sum up, when you were asking like what are the biggest challenges associated with change, I think for me and many of the other folks that I witness is the dysregulation that you experience just because of the change, whether it's the cognitive load or the emotions not being named or things happening to you or whatever it is. The dysregulation can kick in. So I am really glad that that you named that, Grace.
Absolutely.
So.
I learned a ton. This is great.
Yes.
Always smarter after listening to
like
you
I said,
ladies.
I will link that handout that I've made in the show notes. And I am thinking about working on some, continuing education stuff that this shares all of this, because I think it's really helpful. But this has been such a great conversation. And I think there's so much, hopefully, validation on the one hand that we all experience seasons of change, and change is hard and painful, and we can recognize that, but also there's strategies that we can use to move through it. And like, we are in it with you. Each of us has been there and is there in some seasons. And, I think we didn't really mention community, but like, that's such a big piece of being able to connect to others that have been there, whether it's listening to our podcast or like reaching out, to our professional organization or your friends or whoever can connect and support you through that, and look into your team. So thank you for being part of our community. We are going to go now to our ending thoughts from Deepu. Thank you, Deepu. Thank you, Jen and Bridget, for being here and chatting this morning. And thank you to all of our listeners. And we'll talk to you again next month.